Are you ready for some epic Jordan Peterson comebacks? Other than being known for his lectures and writing, Jordan Peterson has gained fame globally for his formidable presence in interviews, particularly when engaging with journalists and panelists from the woke left. His deep academic knowledge, quick with blunt refusal to shy away from controversy, made him an influential figure in public discourse. In addition to that, his ability to unpack complex ideas quickly and applying them to the conversation at hand catches them off guard, leading to many memorable comebacks which have mostly gone viral. But before I go deeper into it, watch this clip.
Well, I'm sure that you've met women in your life that acted towards you in a bullying and detestable manner. It's very difficult for women to cope with that because they don't have any real recourse. And female bullying can be unbelievably vicious. And usually that takes the shape of reputation destruction, innuendo, and gossip. It's well documented. It's very difficult to defend.
But
no, men do it too, but men, no. But patterns,
disproportionately women, in your view, or not? Sorry.
Yes, disproportionately women. That's what the data indicate. I mean, if
but
men
where is the data on innuendo and gossip?
Well, it's among antisocial behavior among adolescents. It's a well-documented field. So because people look at aggressive and antisocial behavior in women and in men. And in women, it tends to take the expression of innuendo, gossip, and reputation destruction. And in men, it tends to take the form of outright physical aggression. And there's a whole literature on that. It's not a surprise to anyone. This has been known for 30 years. I mean, the rates of antisocial...
I think the idea of the female gossip probably predates 30 years.
Well, it does.
By a long time, but that doesn't make it gospel,
but
really,
people
does
have... No, it doesn't. But people have looked at how women express... Look, women have to express aggression somehow unless you're willing to say that they're not aggressive. They tend not to do it physically, not to the degree men do, so they use other channels. And what other channels are there other than physical aggression if you're going to be aggressive? Well, you go after people verbally. You go after them with innuendo and gossip and reputation destruction. And that's how it works.
And just to be clear, that you think that's predominantly a female modus operandi?
It isn't that I think that.
Well,
it's that the clinical literature indicates that.
This is one of the most hostile interviews that Jordan Peterson was on. The host kept twisting words and building false narratives out of thin air. By the way, do subscribe for more discussions like this. It's common scientific knowledge that men and women have different expressions of aggression, and this comes from a combination of various aspects such as differences in psychology, communication styles, and hormones. Research into communication styles has often found that women are more verbally expressive and more likely to utilize language as a tool for relationship management. This inclination could translate into using verbal methods in aggressive encounters. Evidence shows that because women might be more attuned to the social dynamics and implications of relationships, they choose to attack someone's character or reputation as a means of aggression, which is also called indirect aggression. This is not just hypothesizing, there's data backing this up. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, 93% of inmates globally are men, compared to just 7% being women. From a psychological standpoint, aggression manifests differently due to varying levels of hormones such as testosterone, which is linked to physical aggression and typically higher in men than women. Psychological evidence also shows that women might be more prone to experience and express emotions through internalizing behaviors, leading to expressions of aggression in less physical and more psychological or verbal ways. And this internalization is not necessarily less harmful, but can be more covert.
This is the question, the heart of the matter. So on the one hand, you say, look, you don't have a clue what you're doing, stay out of it, right? But we live in democratic systems where it's our responsibility not to stay out of it. So how do you manage that? Because you seem to be saying...
With humility.
Humility, right. But humility doesn't preclude activism.
Generally it does, yes. But,
Why?
But
Why
that doesn't mean that I'm saying that there is no situations under which political action or activism is justified, because there are clearly situations under which it's justified. But it's not the first thing that you should be taught how to do when you're an 18-year-old person going to university and you don't know a damn thing.
So I don't doubt that there's callow youth. I don't doubt that people have a lot to learn. And
they're not learning it from their professors either.
That may be true. That may be true. But you're clearly... I mean, a big part of your narrative comes from that energy of resisting that kind of,
circumventing it.
Circumventing, but you're also saying, these people who complain about the world, they should just focus on their own, what they can control themselves and work within that space.
To begin with,
but equally, there is a slight derision in the tone about people who actually care about bigger than self issues.
It's not slight.
Okay, it's big then. So bigger than self problems, which arguably...
They don't care about them. They just act like they're just acting out the delusion that they care about them generally.
You seem to be caught
I
up
watch
in
activists, the activists at the universities.
Right.
I know what they're like.
And we've seen the videos, and we know that kind of confrontation.
Yes.
And I don't
We've seen
doubt,
Wilfrid Laurier, for
I've
example.
seen many, but I don't doubt that there are those who are like that. But there are many millions more, and I mentioned Gandhi, but
Yeah.
arguably...
You can't use him as an example.
Okay, well, Buddha, for example.
Or
Buddha,
him.
Buddha left his wife and child.
Yeah, but you can't use them as examples.
Okay,
First of all,
then-
like Buddha's like Christ. It's like, well, there's Christ. It's yeah. What do you mean?
No,
There's Christ
no,
in university activists?
No, but
It's
there's...
like, no.
Well, there's... so Martin Luther King, can I use him?
Yeah.
Right? So Martin Luther King had an affair. It was quite well known. His personal life was a bit complex.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't say that, he had to sort that out before he went to sort of try and deal with civil rights in the US. So I'm trying to get at the core of the tension.
No, I would say that his own personal faults didn't preclude his social responsibility. Right. And it really is important to get that straight. But I would say that his own personal faults served as a detriment to his overall mission.
Right.
And then I'm not, believe me, I am not saying that if I was in Martin Luther King's position, I would have done a better job. It's like, I am not saying that, man, not in the least.
Now, that's one unprepared reporter. That's so bad that it's significantly impacting the credibility and reception of the arguments he's trying to present. Getting back to Peterson's point, young activists, particularly those who just enter college, are engaging in social and political activism for the sake of personal validation or social media clout rather than for the common good. This leads to a superficial engagement with complex issues driven by the desire to be seen as a part of the movement without understanding the underlying problems. The cultural shift of being a change maker is also leading individuals to engage in activism as a way to craft a personal identity or brand rather than to promote the common good. This shift is hurting collective efforts that are essential for substantial societal change. Additionally, social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube are influencing young people's approach to activism since it serves in their primary source of information and engagement with social issues. A 2023 study conducted at the UK shows that, and I quote, older teens and young adults aged 16 to 24 are much more likely to consume news online than adults generally, 83% versus 68%, and usually it's via social media on their mobile phone, 63% versus 39%. But these platforms prioritize content that is sensational, simplistic, or emotionally charged, which distorts the complexity of social issues. Young activists are thus focusing on making statements that garner immediate attention or approval rather than engaging deeply with the issues. College students are also at the beginning of their journey into deep political, social, or economic understandings. The depth of comprehension required to grasp these complex issues comes from extensive education, personal experience, or both. Without this depth, activism becomes superficial, driven by an incomplete understanding of the issues at stake, and without critically analyzing the roots of these issues or the long-term impact of the proposed solutions.
I'm confused about how this dovetails with your thesis that the left is too preoccupied with being non-confrontational. Right?
The left is too preoccupied
well, just that
with
we are.
that is
That's
definitely
interesting.
not
Okay,
right.
no, all right.
No, that's
I'm
a good
paraphrasing,
question.
But the idea that liberals, especially intellectuals, are preoccupied with politically correct speech, that they're not.
I see what.
And yet.
No, they're too preoccupied with identity politics by a large margin. And they tend to categorize everyone by their ethnicity and their sex and their gender. And I think all that does is turn people into tribal actors, and that the end result of that is catastrophe.
But weren't you also saying, though, that the left is too worried about offending people?
I think that goes along with...
I will.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Well, that goes with...
But then on the other hand, when the left, for example, offends people in the political sphere, you're questioning whether that's somehow bad for society writ large.
Well, I'm concerned about. I think that those two issues are somewhat separate. I'm concerned about the dialogue in the United States around the presidency pulling people farther and farther apart. It has nothing to do with the behavior of Trump. I think this is an independent issue.
In addition to those being two separate issues, like Peterson points out, that's a fallacy as well. Her questions are based on ideologically driven interpretations over observations corresponding to reality. That's why Peterson gets a lot of attention in such interviews, because he lets the emotional side of the interviewer take over, and they create slippery slopes, which leads to the audience hearing the absurdity of the claims they make. We also can't talk about the modern left without talking about identity politics. It's the core value that their entire ideology is built upon. It has fragmented society into competing interest groups, each prioritizing its own concerns at the expense of overall societal well-being. It's also led to overshadowing socioeconomic factors that affect a broad spectrum of people regardless of their identity groups. The other point she was trying to make is related to when the left's attack on the Republican Party voter base, and thus creating the fallacy that the left can't be offending people because they're the ones concerned about not offending anyone in society. But that's simply not true, since they keep dehumanizing people on the right as a tactic to create an ideologically driven voter base and to divert discussions from real policy that affects working class people, because once you look past their identity politics arguments, there's no substance to the modern left. I think it's best that the reporters and panelists, for their own sake, to deeply think about their questions and arguments before they present them to Jordan Peterson, because he will challenge the premise of every question and debunk their ideologically driven positions. Because remember, the man's a psychologist before being a public speaker.